Welcome back to another edition of Get Well Acadiana. Thank you so much for joining me on the show today. I really appreciate all of you tuning in to learn new ways to change your health and live a longer life using totally natural solutions. And that's what this show is all about every single week. My whole purpose for doing this show is to show the great people of Acadiana that there are things that you can do to improve your health and feel better and prevent the terrible diseases that we are so plagued with here in South Louisiana. There are so many things we could be doing to improve our health. And the reason that's so important is because that improves our future. That improves how healthy we're going to be later on in life. And are we going to be able to still do the things that we want to do, things that we want to be unable to do those things that we want to do later on, in our later years. I'm here with my co-host, Brandon Como. Brandon, how are you?
I'm doing good, Doc.
Man, I'm excited to be back. I was on vacation last week and got some rest and recuperation, and I'm back ready to go today. One of the things that I've been getting a lot of questions on, Brandon, is processed foods. You know, I talk about processed foods all the time, and with patients and on the radio show and with people. And sometimes I think it goes over their head. So I was I was at the grocery store the other day, and I was walking down the aisles, and I was looking at some different items, and I wanted to take one item that I was looking at today and just break it down. And that's a simple package of Fig Newtons. Now, on the front of this package, now I was laughing in the grocery store looking at this. On the front of the package, it looks like it is the picture of health. They've done every conceivable thing they could do to try to make it seem like that this is a healthier alternative. It says made with whole grains on the front of it and made with real fruit. On one corner of the package, it has a big green leaf on it and a beautiful purple fig. And on the bottom, it said good source of fiber. So they've done everything they possibly could to make this seem like it's a pretty healthy food. So people are strolling along and they'll say, Dr. Kevin said I need to start eating better. So instead of grabbing this package of Nestle cookies, I'm going to get these Fig Newtons because they're healthier. At least that's what the package says. So let's break down the details of the ingredients list one by one and take a look at them. And I want you guys to understand what I mean whenever I say processed foods. Number one on the list was whole grain wheat flour. Now, if you look at that and you go, well, it's whole grain, that's supposed to be better for me, right? So that has to be better. Don't let the whole grain label fool you into believing that it's healthier. One serving only contains 3 grams of fiber, and that's probably the cheap, fake, soluble fiber that they've added, which is, basically it's wood chips called cellulose. And so also, whole grains or grains have the unhealthy omega-6 inflammatory fatty acids. And so grains contain omega-6 unhealthy fats. So that's something that's not healthy. So that part is not good for us. Next on the list is sugar. Eating 2 Fig Newtons, you will eat 13 grams of sugar. That's more than 3 teaspoons. And Brandon, I don't know about you, but I never eat 2 of those. It's like 6. So that's 40 grams of sugar, which is several days worth. And again, we think, hey, it's a Fig Newton. It's healthy. It's made of fruit. And then next on the list is high fructose corn syrup. I could do a whole show on this, on how detrimental HFCS is to us. This is a chemically refined sugar that has been shown to cause more weight gain than even regular sugar. It's shown to be a major cause of heart disease and cancer and dementia and liver problems. Some high fructose corn syrup even contains mercury. And some research shows that it can turn off the satisfaction center in our brainstem so that we eat more and more and more. So high fructose corn syrup is not good for us, and it's in absolutely everything. Next on the ingredients list was soybean oil. I mean, that sounds pretty normal. Soybean oil doesn't sound like it's that bad for us. This cheap oil is very high in omega-6 inflammatory fats as well. And so soybean oil is inflammatory, causes a tremendous amount of inflammation in the body. And you guys hear me say this all the time. Inflammation is the precursor to all chronic diseases. And then next on the list is the worst. This should not be in any food item. It has no place in our food supply. That's partially hydrogenated cottonseed oil. Cotton is regulated by the EPA as a textile crop, not by the FDA as a food crop, which means they don't have to follow the list of chemicals banned for food crops. They can follow the textile crop and spray lots of nasty chemicals never meant for food. Cotton has no place in our food supply. It's for making t-shirts, not for making food. So cotton is known as America's dirtiest crop for a reason, and cottonseed oil should never be in our food. And not only that, but they partially hydrogenate it, which makes it even worse. That means that they've turned all of the fats there into trans fats, which again are super inflammatory, clog our arteries, cause heart disease faster than anything else. And then next on the list was sodium benzoate. Now, sodium benzoate is a chemical preservative found in many processed foods, but the Mayo Clinics just found that it can cause many problems, including hyperactivity in children, and it's especially dangerous when mixed with vitamin C. And what's in figs? Vitamin C. And so that is very bad for us. And then next on the list is vanillin. Now, don't be confused because it sounds like vanilla and it tastes like vanilla. But vanillin is not from the vanilla bean because that's very expensive. Vanillin is made from a petrochemical called glycol, which is a byproduct of creosote, which is what they coat telephone poles and cross ties with. But it has like a little vanilla flavor to it, strangely enough. So they use that instead of spending the money on the regular vanilla bean extract. They use a petrochemical made from creosote because it's cheaper. So it goes without mentioning that all of the ingredients are more likely genetically modified, which is not the original form of food that we ate as children. It has been genetically modified to be something completely different than it used to be. Now remember, the front of the package was the picture of health. They had a green leaf and a fig, and it said contains whole grains and made with real fruit on there. And this is just one example of processed foods that make up the majority of our diet. They're very inflammatory. They're chemically laden, genetically modified frankenfoods, I call them. And I'm not picking on Fig Newtons. All processed food have these ingredients or worse. And so we all have to get back to eating real, whole, live, natural foods, something that was alive at some point. And we could turn this country's health around and save billions of dollars if we would just focus on prevention and wellness. And nobody's talking about that in Washington. Nobody says anything about, hey, what about we try to prevent issues and we work on wellness as a country as a whole? And that's just not being done. But that's what I do as a wellness coach and a natural healthcare expert, is I help guide my patients down the pathway of finding a healthier, happier, disease-free existence for now and in the future by working on and educating on some of these things without all these processed, unhealthy foods that we're eating. Because the number one thing that they do is that, and you notice all those ingredients that I list, almost every one of them was inflammatory. And every doctor out there agrees, no matter what their degree is in, that inflammation is the precursor to almost all chronic diseases. Now, when we get back from this break, I'm going to tell you about a fascinating study that was done and a book that was written called The Dorito Effect. And it's all about how food flavorings have skewed the way our brain looks at at foods that are out there, and that the cravings that we have on a day-to-day basis has changed because of the food flavorings that are now in our food. And you're going to find this fascinating. If you know somebody that's interested in these in these kind of topics, text them right now and tell them to tune into this next segment. It's going to be about how the food flavorings have skewed the way our brain looks at our food and is causing us to eat more and more, and it's contributing to the obesity problem that we have in America. So stay tuned. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Get Well Acadiana with Dr. Kevin. Thank you so much for joining me on the show today. Now, before break, we were discussing what exactly is processed food. When I say cut down on processed foods, I hope that now will make it clear as to why some of these ingredients, some of these really cheap fake ingredients are so bad for our body. And those things make up the majority of the American diet. Almost everything we eat comes out of a package. And ingredients that are in those foods that come out of a package are dead. The foods are void of any nutritional things that our body needs. They're void of enzymes and phytonutrients and bioflavonoids. All of the things that we need to get our bodies healthier. They're empty calories. And when we talk about empty calories, we mean that these foods are void of anything that our body needs to improve. We're eating more and more food and starving our bodies at the same time. Now, the food flavorings that are in our food have completely skewed the way our brain craves and looks at food. So I wanted to discuss some excerpts from a new book that I find pretty fascinating about flavorings in our food and how that has contributed to our obesity problem in America. And I've looked at this quite a bit over the last few years, and this seems to be really one of the main reasons that our brain and what we crave is so different from what it used to be. And see, our body has the innate ability to crave the nutrients that we're short of. And this has been there since way back in the hunter-gatherer days. So in our ancestral lives, back in the day, if we were short of calcium, we may crave and seek out a bone product and find a bone and start chewing on that. If we were short of protein, we would seek out and crave meat products, and we would find meat and we would eat that. If we were short of vitamin C, we would seek out and crave berries, and we would seek out a bush of berries and eat that. So our internal craving system had the ability to crave the nutrients that our body was short of. And that kept our body from running short of vital nutrients that our body needed to be healthy. So what we craved was critically important to what we were short in, or what our body needed at that time. Now, fast forward from that to the last, 50 to 70 years, and because of food flavorings, that has completely skewed our brain and body's ability to seek out and crave the foods that contain the nutrients that we're short of. So the bottom line with this, guys, is we're getting the strawberry experience, but we're not getting the strawberry nutrition. And if you don't think everything has food flavorings in it, look at your ingredients list. Even things like chicken breast, you'll see injected with food flavorings. And they'll take chicken and they'll have these sort of needle things in the processing, and they will inject flavoring in it. Because the chickens are raised so fast and in such disgusting conditions that they have no flavor. They taste like cardboard, so they inject flavoring even in meats and chicken to make it palatable. And so we're getting the experience of that flavor, but we're not getting the nutrition of that flavor. And this has thrown our body's ability to crave certain foods completely off. There was a pediatrician named Clara Davis that did a remarkable study in the early 1900s. And, Brandon, this had to be in the 1900s because you could never do this today. They would never let you'd go to jail if you did this today. But she took 15 foster babies that she was raising, and she gave them access to 34 foods. Now, she did this study, and these 34 foods contain things like water, beef, corn, apples, milk, cabbage, and so on. Now, amazingly, she never encouraged them to eat anything. They could choose anything they wanted at any time without the influence of commercials or adults whatsoever. And the children chose the nutrition that they needed by taste. One child with rickets even chose to drink cod liver oil on their own until they were cured. And they did that without any encouragement at all. And if you've ever tasted cod liver oil, you know it tastes terrible. But this child chose to drink that because that was his internal craving system, and it had not been skewed yet. So there is a natural way that our bodies crave the foods or the nutrition that we need by taste and by flavor. Now, before the 1950s, there was really no such thing as food flavorings. Food tasted how it was supposed to taste. So the food nutrition matched the food's flavor, and that matched the food that you were eating. And then in the 1950s, they decided to take food flavorings and put it on tortilla chips to make Doritos. And that was actually one of the first food flavoring type foods that was out there. So now over the last 70 years, we have so focused on high yield and pest resistance that our food supply has lost much of its natural flavoring. A chicken has been genetically altered to grow from birth to ready to harvest in 6 weeks. So if that were a baby, that would be like from 6 pounds to over 500 pounds by 2 months old. And that's how bad we've altered the natural growth of our food and our livestock. But it tastes like cardboard, so we have to inject these natural flavorings in it. And don't let the quote-unquote natural flavorings fool you into. There's really not much natural about it. Food flavorings were originally developed in order to, like I said, to put on tortilla chips to make Doritos. But now it's in absolutely everything. So if you look at your ingredients list on even things like meats and chicken breasts, you're going to see natural flavorings. Everything we eat now is closer to the Doritos than it was to the original food that it was designed to be. And the reason that I bring all this up today is because there's an important connection between flavor, craving, nutritional needs, and obesity. So the cravings won't stop. We crave more and more and more food because we're getting the flavor, but we're not getting the nutrition. So you're getting the berry flavor, but you're not getting the berry nutrition. We're getting the flavor of grapes, but we're not getting the nutrition of grapes. All of these flavorings have addicted us to eat more and more food, yet we're getting less and less nutrition. We are eating more food than ever and starving our bodies at the same time. Our food is void of nutrition, vitamins, enzymes, and minerals, phytonutrients, all of the things that we need. One apple in 1958 had the same vitamin content as over 50 apples do today. So we're eating more and more food and starving ourselves at the same time. And our brains have gotten completely confused because of all of these flavorings that are in foods. So in its natural state, our body has a connection between what you crave, what we seek out, the taste of that food, and it makes an assumption on the nutritional content of that based on flavor. And that's not what's happening. So our body assumes that if we taste fruit, we're getting the nutrition of fruit, not artificially flavored junk food that tastes like fruit. Now, is it just possible? I'll ask you, is it just possible that this is a huge factor in America's obesity problem? I think it's not only possible, I think it's likely. So what can we do? Well, it's up to you. Eat real, whole, live, natural food. Go to your farmers markets. Buy the more expensive tomatoes. They taste better. Buy the organic foods that have not been tinkered with no artificial flavorings and chemicals and pesticides. You know, Brandon, we're cheapskates when it comes to our food. We buy the nicer clothes. We have the iPhone 10. We bought the nicer car. But when it comes to our food, we think it ought to be as cheap as possible, and the cheaper the better. And don't do that. Don't be a cheapskate whenever it comes to your food. This is what's fueling your future. Think about that. What you're eating now is fueling what you're going to be able to do when you're 60, 70, 80 years old. You're fueling your future. Read your ingredients list. Read your labels. See, if you see artificial flavors or natural flavorings, it's been engineered by a human. It comes in a package, and you can experience the flavor, but you're not getting the nutrition from it, and it's going to skew your body to want more and more and keep eating and eating and eating. It's almost like they have addicted us to food by these techniques that they have used on the American public. I find this stuff fascinating, ladies and gentlemen. I hope that you guys do as well. So it's important that if your brain craves something, it gets what your body's actually short of. Now, after this next break, I want to talk to you more about some of the food industry tricks that they do to make us eat more and more and more food. Because if you know these things, if you know the tricks that the big food companies pull on us to try to addict us to their food, you cannot fall victim to it as easily. So stay tuned right after this break. I'm going to go through some food industry tricks that they use, so don't go away. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Get Well Acadiana with Dr. Kevin. Thank you so much for joining me on the show today. This is a very important show that we understand in South Louisiana how we are being manipulated by the big food industry to eat more and more food that's cheaper and cheaper with less and less nutrition. And so I wanted you guys to understand that there is a consistent push in Washington, D.C., to make us less and less informed about what's in the food that we're eating. And most Americans don't know this. They think, well, if it's on the shelf, it can't be bad for us. You know, the FDA's watching all this. It's not true. Unfortunately, it's not true. Several bills right now are in Congress that would make it much harder to tell what you're really eating and where it's from. We all know how Washington works on this channel. You know, the biggest donors get their stuff passed. And there's not too many people that donate more to Washington than the food industry. Monsanto Seed, Kellogg's, Kraft Foods, Nestle, PepsiCo, Coca-Cola, General Mills. These are some of the largest companies in the country. All of these companies lobby Washington to pass laws that will allow them not to list everything that's in the food that they produce or where it's from. And they want to make it as confusing as possible for you to try to figure out what you're eating and where it came from and if it's genetically modified. Many of these bills would prevent governments from requiring GMO labeling and also removing the country of origin labeling, like where it comes from. And especially on our meats and poultry and fish, making it harder to know where your food came from. Personally, I don't want to eat fish from Vietnam or Thailand because I know how they are raised. I know the disgusting conditions that these tilapia from Vietnam and Thailand and these third world countries are raised.
One that's really scary because sometimes you'll have seafood that comes from other countries, but on the title of it, it's got a Cajun-sounding name or a name from here in Acadiana. But in reality, that food is not from somewhere here in Acadiana. It's not a Cajun product. It's from overseas.
Yeah, it'd be like Moe's tilapia. And it turns out it's from Thailand or somewhere. Yeah, and listen, it's raised in the most disgusting conditions with banned antibiotics. It's definitely not something that you want to eat. Yeah. You know, Moe's seafood, and it's all Vietnamese stuff. So, you know, you have to watch that. But they want to remove that. They're trying to pass laws where they don't have to put where it come from, so you would never know. And, you know, I don't want to eat pork from China because I know what they do to it. I don't want to eat from some of these places. But the food industry is spending an enormous amount of money to lobby the legislation to the tune of, get this, Brandon, in 2015 alone, they spent $100 million in the first 6 months to lobby Washington to take away some of this labeling. So what they said, their quote was, putting these labels on food sends the wrong message about food safety, and it would cost more to consumers. Well, I mean, I don't know how much putting a small label on the box talking about where it came from would cost, but I mean, I think it's pretty minimal. The truth is, they don't want you to know what you're eating. They don't want you to know where it come from. If you're not embarrassed about where your food comes from and what you're putting in it, why are you so scared to label it? To the tune of $100 million the first half of 2015 alone. If I'm going to spend $200 million a year on something like food labeling, how much money do you think really is at stake for these companies that use these foods from these third world countries because they're cheaper? And if they use banned pesticides and antibiotics and, even if they're raised in the worst conditions, they're cheaper. So they want to import some of these things. And the reason that I bring all this up today, guys, is because the general public thinks what's on your shelf must be okay. Most of our food isn't even looked at all. I mean, I think the seafood, it's something like single-digit percentages ever get looked at. It's like 3 or 4% of the fish that's imported ever even gets evaluated. And it's a very, very low percentage. And then also you have donating to Washington, the Cattlemen's Association, the Pork Producers Association, Tyson Chicken, Hormel Foods. This all goes to Washington, and this lobbying to take information out of the public's hands goes on all the time. They recently got over $4 million to promote genetically modified salmon, even though the research on it is very, very sketchy. And also then you have the agrochemical producers, and they're trying to stop a bill that would allow chemicals to be sprayed over water and lessen the regulations on that. And they gave Washington $11 million recently. So, listen, I'm not one that believes in a ton of regulation on American businesses. In fact, I'm on the opposite side of the political spectrum as that. I've been a card-carrying conservative my whole life. But at some point, this becomes important for the health of America. All of these pesticides and chemicals and genetically modified foods and food preservatives and additives have gotten way out of hand. Just Monsanto seed by itself, who, by the way, I refer to as the evil empire of the food industry. Monsanto seed is a multi-billion-dollar corporation that makes their revenue off of manipulating our food supply, and they are the creators of genetically modified food called Roundup Ready. Now, what they have done, they have manipulated the genetic structure of foods that they sell so that you can spray Roundup on it and it won't kill it. And of course, all this is very secretive, but what we think that they did is, let's say they take the soybean plant and they took the genetic structure of it, and we think that on one end they spliced part of a bacteria genetic structure. And then on the other end of the DNA, we think that they spliced, or the genetic structure, we think that they spliced part of a virus DNA on it. So what you end up with is you have part soybean, part bacteria, part virus, so that you can spray more Roundup on it and it won't kill it. There has been a 600% increase in neurological disorders. There are now 186 known autoimmune diseases. Thyroid disruptions and thyroid problems are off the chart. Neurological problems like depression, anxiety, ADD, and autism, these things are all through the roof. We're seeing younger and younger children develop worse and worse cancers. I could go on and on for 10 minutes about these statistics of the health going south as the use of these genetically modified foods are going up, and I don't think that's a coincidence. And as far as GMO foods go, they love to cite these studies after study about how the GMO foods are harmless. It has now come out that these studies have been tailored and carefully designed to hide the dangers of GMO foods and the side effects of eating these GMO plants. One former Monsanto scientist named Dr. Saralji, who is now a whistleblower from Monsanto, admitted that when his colleagues discovered their GMO corn had damaged the health of rats being tested, they rewrote the study to hide the effects. And according to the official studies put out, the rats did just fine. But after a European firm reanalyzed that study, they found the company had repeatedly hidden signs of toxicity to the kidneys and livers in the rats being tested. And we find patients with kidney and liver damage all the time whenever we do our blood work. We find kidney and liver damage on a very big percentage of patients that come in for our wellness programs. And Dr. Siralji conducted the first long-term study on Roundup Ready corn, and they were shocked by what they found. They first started seeing signs of toxicity in the first 90 days, but this emerged into full-blown organ damage after 2 years. The rats that ate the GMO corn ended up after 2 years with full-blown hormonal problems and developed tumors and died. Now, if a rat can't eat this stuff, guys, designed to eat garbage out of a dumpster, what do you think this stuff is doing to our health? Allergies are through the roof. All of these diseases are through the roof. Hormone problems, immune system issues, autoimmune diseases, infertility, depression, anxiety. All of these things are through the roof. And there has to be some connection somewhere. Now, Dr. Siralji has since been harassed. Researchers were fired. Researchers lost their accreditation. They've lost their funding. They were denied tenure. They were hassled in many, many ways by Monsanto's lawyers. And Dr. Siralji actually took them to court and won a defamation lawsuit when they tried to discredit his work. So, this is real stuff that goes on behind the scenes that the public doesn't ever even know about. You just go to the grocery store and buy what's there. And it's important that we are at least able to label what our food has in it. And I'm not saying you have to choose to eat certain things, but everybody ought to at least say, well, yeah, our food ought to be correctly labeled. We ought to at least be able to know what is in our food. And here's the last thing that I wanted to say about GMO Roundup Ready foods before break. And that is to our local farmers. I'm not in any way trying to make your life harder. I support you guys. I have family members that are farmers. I want y'all to do great. And I know this is not y'all's fault. If you didn't grow what everybody else was growing, you could not compete. I'm not blaming you. I love our local farmers. Y'all work hard. I want y'all to succeed and flourish. I know you're only doing what everybody else has to do. And so it's an industry thing. It's not a local thing. But I think the nation as a whole needs to take a very close look at our entire food supply, top to bottom, in an unbiased way, and evaluate, is there a connection between some of these foods, some of these pesticides and chemicals, and what is going on with these health problems? I'm not saying there is or there isn't. I'm saying it needs to be looked at. The jury is still out, but there's a lot of hints and leanings and evidence and things that would show there is some links there in a pretty strong way, as a matter of fact. The studies that have been done are not honest, and that's kind of my point here. Now, when we get back from this break, we're going to talk to you about what our country versus other country differences in their food supply is. So, in other words, what's Europe doing? What's some of these other major industrialized countries doing, and how is that different from what our food supply is? I think you'll find it pretty fascinating, so stay tuned. Welcome back to Get Well Acadiana with Dr. Kevin. Thank you so much for joining me on the show today. I wanted to finish up the show by talking about foods that are banned in other countries but are perfectly okay in the United States. And the reason that I bring this up is because of how powerful our food lobby is in the United States to pass laws that help the food companies and not the people. And I think you'll be pretty surprised at the list of things that are perfectly okay to put in food in the United States, but banned in almost every other country in the world. And for example, arsenic. Arsenic-based food additives for chicken is allowed by the FDA to promote growth. And if you give arsenic to the chickens, it makes their flesh appear pinker for longer on the grocery store shelf. So this insinuates that the chicken's fresher, even if it isn't. And when you genetically modify and grow a chicken as fast as they do, the chicken doesn't look very good. So they put arsenic in order to make it appear pinker. And these arsenic-based additives have never been approved in other countries, only in the United States. And we test arsenic as part of our wellness program, and we find high levels of arsenic in people very, very often. Now, the next on the list is a really big one, and this is brominated vegetable oil. That sounds pretty inert, right? Brominated vegetable oil, it's actually a nasty chemical that started out as a flame retardant. It's now been banned in over 100 countries. BVO, what BVO does, brominated vegetable oil, what it does, it prevents other chemicals and food colorings from separating in sports drinks. It's in Gatorade and Powerade and other sports drinks and flavored drinks. And research shows that this is a major thyroid and hormone malfunction disruptor. It can cause thyroid malfunction. Now, also, it affects growth problems, mental problems, hyperactivity, concentration, and birth problems. And so this brominated vegetable oil, or BVO, like I said, banned in over 100 countries. And the reason they put it in Gatorade is so that when you look at it on the shelf, you won't have two layers. You won't have a layer on top that's one thing and then a layer on bottom that's the other. It prevents that separation, and it's banned in 100 countries. Perfectly good here. Another important preservative for you guys to watch is BHT. Now, the National Toxicology Program in 2011 reported that this chemical can trigger ADD, ADHD, allergic reactions, mental disorders, and much more. It's banned in all of Europe and Japan and almost every other place on the world. You're going to see it in things like cereal, chewing gum, peanut butter spreads, and nut mixes. In fact, I had some grits that I was going to give my little boy the other morning, and I looked at it, and one of the ingredients was BHT. And so don't give that to your children. But in the United States, it's good to go. Banned almost everywhere else in the world. And listen, I could go on and on, but I think you guys get the point. My purpose for talking about all of this on the show today is that when you hear me say processed foods are bad for you, now I hope that you guys will understand what I mean. And when I say try to eat healthier, more whole, cleaner, real food in your diet, you guys will understand why this is so important to me. And not important to me, important to you and important to your future. It's what's causing America to lose our health. These foods are making us sick. These foods are making us overweight and obese and giving us diseases. And honestly, guys, I just touched the surface today. I could go on and on about these chemicals and food preservatives and what each one of them is and what they do. This was just the tip of the iceberg. But I think you guys get the point. I'm not going to drone on and on about this, but I just wanted you guys to understand some of the things that we take into our bodies every day and how it is contributing to disease, early death, obesity, and a loss of health here in America. And the problem is nobody knows, but we should. We should know what we're putting in our body and in our children's body. If you guys want to know more about this, I am a certified weight loss coach and a wellness coach. And, my job is to sit down with people and try to show them the pathway to leading a healthier life. We have tons of things that we can do to try to turn your health around by using some of the latest technologies and techniques out there. If you want to call my office and set up an appointment, I'll sit down with you and we'll develop a protocol to get you healthy once and for all. The number is 837-7174. Thank you all for listening. Hope you enjoyed the show. Have a great weekend.